Councilmember Wilkerson, we are good to go.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Was it not a gorgeous weekend this last weekend? It was like perfect fall in Spokane. So that was the weekend, and now we're here. So this is the meeting of the Finance Administration Committee on October the 18th. I'm called to order, and I would like approval of the minutes, please.
So moved.
Moved, and did I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
I think the ayes have it, and so is the order. Council members, is there anything on the consent that you would like pulled? Hearing none? Yes, Councilmember Munn.
I just thought it might be good to add the item on the business fees because we've had a couple of suggested revisions, and we probably should discuss it here before we discuss it this afternoon.
All righty. Do we want to go into that at this point in time? Councilmember Cathcart, are you in the room?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry
So you had made a substitution for fees.
Yeah, I simply put out, and I appreciated the change on the 50% for new business, but I was just merely suggesting that I'm just still not comfortable raising the fee on others, and I know we're deferring it till June, but just generally speaking, just not comfortable with that fee increase. And so was just proposing that we continue with the reduction for initiating businesses, but would hold off at least for now on any sort of fee increases for others.
Thank you. Councilmember Munn.
Do you know what the fiscal impact of that might be?
I don't. I think it'd be hard to predict because we don't know how many businesses are going to be created or initiate in the next 6 months. So it's a little hard to guesstimate, I think, on what that would be.
And then what would the term of that be?
It'd be just for the next year. So
2022?
Yeah.
So the term would be moved from June of 2022 to December of 2022?
No, I guess what I was suggesting was we would just simply hold off on considering an increase at this time, is my suggestion. If there's other ideas on how we'd go about that, I'm certainly open.
Yeah, I think we need to have a term because it's reviewed annually.
I mean, if we wanted to say for the 2022 fiscal year.
Councilmember Kinnear.
When we first started talking about this, there hadn't been any increase in business license fees for, I think it was 10 years. I was not on council at the time, and Joe Shogun put forward a ordinance that would increase it, I think, 2.9 or 3% a year, so that people wouldn't be shocked when they had this enormous increase. So the idea was not to wait for years and years before you increase business licenses. So if we hold off on 1 year, it's going to be a little odd. I can deal with half a year in June, but holding off a whole year, and then do we increase it by 3% for 2023? Do we increase it by 6%? I mean, how's that going to work? Because we were on a schedule is what I'm saying, and now all of a sudden we're bumping that schedule.
Appreciate the intent, but I think I'm more comfortable with the substitution that I put out over a week ago. So thank you, though.
And Councilmember Munn, that was really to incentivize new businesses. That was the purpose of that also. I do want to make it known that the increase on the average is about $7, according to our CFO. Any other discussion? I would like Atlas to at least burp to be in agreement. Thank you. To be continued at briefing this afternoon. Anything else on consent? If not, we will go into our first discussion on the ARP grant agreement. Arians, Ms. Smith, are you there?
I am. Good afternoon, Council. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I am assisting, as requested by City Administrator, the CHHS Department for this particular grant response. To give a brief overview, the purpose is to bring this before you for approval to respond with our acceptance of the ARP Home Program allocation. And the action that will be required by the city is to submit the signed grant agreement form, which is in the amount of $4,628,671 for approval through signature at the mayor's office to HUD. The current letter has the deadline as October 22nd, which for your consideration could be moved as a by-leave for consent today, or we do have a HUD extension pending if you would like for it to go through normal council approval cadence and timeline at our regular intervals. The duration of this funding award would be from September 1st, 2021 through September 30th, 2030. And this grant is for the City of Spokane, and Spokane County and the other small municipalities are receiving separate funding award. Some key information about this grant is that it's different than the standard home funding allocations. In fact, the 97-page grant guidance document has about 47 pages of differences in use eligibility for the program development that we will need to be aware of as we go forward. This also includes two significant exceptions: that there is no match for this particular home funding, which is normally a requirement, and that the allocation plan, which is basically the holistic scope and document plan, must be approved by HUD prior to being awarded the full grant amount. Some examples of eligible programs for this unique ARP home grant include, but are not limited to, housing loss prevention, housing counseling, new or expanded locations for non-congregate shelters owned by nonprofits, and include M&O expenses. The technical or admin assistance can be granted up to 5% to assist us as we construct the allocation plan. And then once HUD has approved that allocation plan, we then have an additional 10% or up to 15% of the total award to be used for administrative costs to implement the rest of the programming. So I wanted to give you that overview and ask for your preference on how you would like to proceed with the formal agreement going forward.
Thank you. I had heard that HUD was not giving any extensions. Where did I hear that at? That came up in conversations.
So Aaron, if I may, so it's only on the HUD NOFO where we don't have an extension on the deadline. It's kind of a matter of course for this one. Although, as Arian pointed out, if you want to suspend the rules and move this one ahead quicker, we certainly can.
Thank you. Council President Beggs.
Yeah, I just wanted to support suspending the rules and approving it this afternoon. Council suspended the rules to endorse getting this done faster last week, so I'm pretty sure that we just want to get it done. So I'll be running the meeting, so I won't be bringing the motion, but I hope someone brings the motion to suspend the rules and that we just adopt it this afternoon.
Councilmember Kinnear?
I guess we'll find out how this will intersect with discussion B that Mr. Beggs, Council President Beggs, is going to talk about. But I'd kind of like to know, are there going to be any restrictions on how we as a city can limit the use, or are there any requirements that we can put around this grant?
Go ahead, Ms. Schmidt.
I would like to say that I think as long as we are within not only the allowances and the unique eligibility constraints, that local entities can add more requirements. One thing to just note that I just learned about last week is it's highly advised not to combine, or it may be actually restricted to combine funds of this ARP home grant with regular formula home funds. So that's one thing we want to be aware of, is that we don't inadvertently co-mingle programming or applications, because that just could set us up for some unintended audit findings. So that's probably some of those add-ons that we would just make crystal clear locally, so that we just keep those pots of money separate.
Does that include ARP funding as well?
I'll have to dig in a little further, but because they're both federally sourced, I think so. But once again, I'll defer to Tanya on that and what she's looking at ARP funding. This is meant to be a standalone application for particular all-encompassing projects, and the initial conversations I've heard of is maybe joining with our other cities and county for applications of areas of joint interest inside the city limits that we can do with our collective ARP home funding to get some pretty significant things done, but wouldn't then be dependent on allocations from other funding sources, once again, to keep the boundaries of this crystal clear. But more on that to come.
And we have the bandwidth to execute this in-house, or who will we be partnering with to make this all happen?
There's significant interest because of some of the limitations currently going on with staff at the city to leverage what is available with our regional partners, so that they could maybe burden some of the administrative side because of said things, but yet we would reap the benefits of solutions inside the city limits. So there's a lot of interest in partnering where we may have lack, but be able to really well place this funding.
Thank you.
And we have a very good, I think, partner network, just to expand on what Arian's saying. And right now we don't have any home program representation, with existing staff. So we certainly need the help now, and I think that can become a model for the future.
Thank you. Councilmember Stratton.
Quick question. So if we reach out and there's we have regional partners taking some of the burden of this, is there an administrative cost for that? Do we know how much that's going to be?
In our response to HUD, with this agreement, we actually have to state our rate. And so what would happen is we would stay within whatever the rate has been for the city of Spokane. And if we don't have staff proper doing it, we would just do a pass-through for whoever's doing it on our behalf. But it cannot go above and beyond what is stipulated already in the grant constraints.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And on to the ordinance for rental assistance, Council President Beggs.
Yeah, thanks. And if you haven't had a chance, I commend you to read this draft. Mr. McClatchy and I have been working on this for a while in consultation with people across the state. So the challenge we're trying to deal with on this is that we have $25 million of rental assistance to distribute to landlords on behalf of tenants. And we don't really have much, any side rails or guidelines of how we're doing that. And so this is attempting to be that ordinance. And in the future, there's going to be ongoing state money. So it just tries to set out a framework is the main thing for how we do rental assistance payments to landlords for tenants. And then it has two other very significant components, and they're probably the subject of debate out there in the future, and today's just an introduction to it. So one of them is, near the beginning of it, it sets out a procedure for tenants to have protection from eviction if they have applied to have money sent to their landlord under rental assistance programs if they're eligible and if there's money in the program and it's operating. And it just prevents them from being evicted while the paperwork's being handled. So that's one thing. As many of you know, the governor's order that accomplishes the same goal is set to expire at the end of the month. It may or may not be extended, but it essentially keeps people in their homes when the landlord is going to be made whole and doesn't just evict them because of delays in the vendors getting the money out the door to the landlords. So that's one pretty significant thing. And then the second significant thing is it puts a restriction on how much rent can be raised for those landlords that accept the government money. And essentially, it keeps it at the consumer price index. So landlords can raise their rent for increasing prices, but if they're accepting government money for rental assistance, it restricts them from raising the rent beyond the consumer price index through 2023, when hopefully the pandemic impacts will be over. So those are the two highlights that are there. I've sent it to the Landlord Association, and we're chatting later this week about their thoughts about it. But that's the summary to start.
Yes, Councilmember Cathcart.
Yeah, well, obviously I have concerns over how this is going to affect supply in the city, but I guess a couple questions. One is, let's see, Section 030, past rent owed, talking about how landlords can't issue an eviction as long as they've basically applied for the rental assistance. And I'm wondering how that applies to issues that are not related to rent payments. So someone's potentially going to be evicted for some other concern that's going on in the unit. It sounds to me like they would also not be allowed to be evicted for that based on how this is written. Is that true?
That's not the intent of it. We'll look at it again. But no, the intent is if the only protection from eviction if they've applied for the rental assistance for the landlords is just the unpaid rent, and only if a portion of the unpaid rent is from July 31st or earlier, so the COVID impact. But if there's something else going on, a danger to the property, a danger to people, other material breaches in the lease or the rental agreement, the intent is that those would go forward.
Okay.
It's just if it's a paperwork delay on the money for rental assistance to the landlords related to the COVID impact.
So, and then on 090, the rent increases. So I guess I'm wondering, how does this affect landlords or tenants where rental assistance has already been applied for and this was not a provision or a requirement? Is this going to be retroactive? Is there a grandfathering in of those who've applied already? And then what about those who are, say, owners of multiple properties? I guess I'm just trying to read exactly how this is written, and if one has accepted but another hasn't, is it only on the unit and not on the actual landlord that the prohibition on rent increases applies?
So the first question, it's not meant to be retroactive. So if a landlord accepted government assistance without this requirement being there, they're not held to that because they didn't know about it, and they did. On the second question, I think that's a good issue, again, for debate and decision by the council. It's not, I don't think it's entirely clear how it's written. It could be read either way. I think that the most plain language of the current draft is it would apply to landlords for all their properties if they accepted government money, then it would apply. But that's a decision point that council would need to decide. And as you might imagine, that's an important point. So, yeah.
Okay. And then I guess last thing I would just comment, wondering about the CPI. I don't know the exact percentage off the top of my head, but I'm really wondering if Our utility rates have actually increased with just CPI, and they haven't exceeded that. If property taxes with valuations have increased beyond CPI, there's just a lot of other external costs that are going to affect these landlords. And I just worry limiting it to CPI would perhaps actually be a cut to them rather than even just making them whole. And so I just want to make sure, I mean, I have concerns with the policy in general, but I would want to make sure if the policy is going to go forward, that we're taking all of that into consideration.
Yeah, I look forward to hearing from the landlords on that. You know, property taxes are limited within the city, regardless of valuation, unless valuation is significantly higher in a particular neighborhood or another. And the big changes in property taxes in recent years have been the levies that have been passed by the voters, most notably the school district one. And that's exactly the feedback I'd love to get from the landlords of what their increases are. The CPI, as you know, has been going up pretty steeply lately, so I'm not sure. And in the past, what I heard from representatives from I would say, the smaller landlords is that they were setting their rent increases to the cost of living and not doing these giant 30 or 40% ones. That tended to be the larger corporate landlords from out of town. So that's why I landed on the CPI, because that seemed to be the practice for your average landlord in the city. But love to hear from them on that.
Okay.
Great. Any more questions for Council President Beggs on this? All right, we look forward to more discussion around what I'm sure is going to be a pretty lively topic going forward. So thank you, Council President Beggs. At this point, we're going to talk about the ordinance for REACH and the intermodal funding. Michelle, if you're ready.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. This is just an ordinance that I'm bringing forth to do a little bit of house cleaning with some funds and to ask permission to set up a new fund for the first quarter percent REAP dollars. And we already have a fund for the second quarter percent, but the uniqueness of the first quarter is that we are now limited to 35% or a maximum of $1 million to be spent on maintenance of capital, and then the rest is to be spent on capital in the capital plan. This will give us a better way to manage the funds and keep them all together and to be able to say that we received X amount, we can only spend this on maintenance, and then that would be spent on maintenance. The other thing is that we wanted to propose to eliminate Fund 1450, which is the under freeway parking and the intermodal facility, and we're going to combine that with asset management, and along with that, change the name of asset management to facilities management. Have any questions?
Council President? Mute.
You're on mute.
Thanks. I know there are a couple different REIT funds, but my recollection was that one of them, for a certain period of time, allows the funds to be used on homelessness issues. Is that this one, or is that a different one?
That is not this one. That falls under REIT, the REIT 2. So that's a new allowable expense under REIT 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Michelle, do you want to continue on the SBO for accounting and salary savings then? Are there more questions?
Sure, thank you. So the accounting department has had some significant changes in the last year. We've had some promotions, which has kind of given us 3 vacant accounting clerks that we really highly depend on. There are worker bees in the department to do our payables and payroll and stuff like that. So with them being their pipeline to our generated staff, having 3 vacancies has taken quite a hit for us. So I was asking to be able to come forth with an SBO to use salary savings from the 3 vacant positions to contract with Robert Half account temps, and to get in a couple of temporary accountants to fill the need while we have the opportunity to fill the pipeline. They did close the application for the accounting clerks last Friday. I believe they are testing this Friday, and so we should be able to have a list to work off for permanent hire in about a month.
Great.
Is there any questions?
Any questions? I think we're all understanding staffing challenges right now.
Thank you.
So, thank you. All right. Philip, the SBO for BOYA, deferred comp, please.
Thanks for taking the time with me today. I've got 3 legislative items, and they're all related to retirement plans. So I'll go through a quick presentation. At the end of it, you'll understand what those 3 legislative items are if I've done my job well. So at a very high level, the retirement benefits of this city are designed really to allow our workforce to focus on their primary mission of providing services to the community. There's been lots of studies that find money is the biggest source of stress for Americans, and that stress tends to evolve throughout a person's career. You know, at the beginning, it's building a family, finding housing, and then as they move towards retirement, that becomes the major stressor. And so they start asking major questions like, how much will I need? How will I afford it? How long do I need to pay out my benefits? So we've tried to answer that question through the retirement department benefits. Our goal is to provide 80% of active income, or their active salaries, as ongoing income. That comes from about half, so 40% of the 80 from the CSRS pension. City contributes to Social Security, so that's about 70% of their working, and then 10% comes from their contributions to the 457 plan. So when we look at this and make sure we're achieving our goals, we do find that the retirement benefit works out to about $1 million for the city retirees, and we're able to get quite close to that income replacement, about 79% for those that do contribute at just the minimum matching level to their defined contribution plan. So almost $600,000 of value comes from their CSRS benefit. When you add in Social Security, it's nearly a little over $900,000 in retirement benefits. And then about $120,000 takes them over that $1 million mark. So we are achieving our strategic goals, providing a very valuable benefit to the employees that they make contributions to throughout their working career. And when they do retire, this is generally the largest asset that they have is their retirement benefit. So quickly, there are essentially 4 plans that we administer. The CSRS defined benefit plan, that I mentioned previously. The 457 plan is our defined contribution plan. There's also 2 legacy defined benefit plans for firefighters and police that started with the city before October 1st of 1977. So these 2 are closed plans, and everybody has retired, so no active employees in these plans. So with the retirement department, because we do have both active and retirees, we have the largest population of employees that we do service. Also have some of the largest liabilities and assets on the city balance sheet. So more than $700 million in assets across the plans, more than $600 million in those defined benefit liabilities. And then our annual budget, we pay out about $43 million a year in benefits. But because we do make contributions and invest those, we only actually impact the annual operating budget by less than half of that at about $21 million a year. So the key metrics we evaluate each year, there are actuarial valuations. We have a firm that comes in, specializes in liabilities, measures our benefit, determines how much it'll cost to keep providing those benefits on an ongoing basis to make sure that the plans remain healthy. This year we had our funding ratio increase from just under 64% to nearly 66%. That's up more than 12% from 2015, so we have made some progress in improving our funding ratio. The biggest reason we've been able to make that progress is in 2017, or at the end of 2017 for the 2018 plan year, we were able to close this shortfall in our contributions and make contributions equal to the actuarially determined contribution amount each year on a one-year trailing basis. So previously, each time that bargaining units negotiated, we would set the contribution rate for the life of the contract. In 2018, when we added the rule of 90, we made that update annually to whatever the actuaries determined. And so that allowed us to close that funding gap by about 14% there. We've been able to maintain that funding ratio since. Additionally, we've built in some newer tiers to the plan that are pretty healthy. So or all of the liability, the unfunded liability to the plan is for those that have joined before 2001. So it's the majority of participants, more than 2/3, and they make up about 70% of the liability, and it is all of the unfunded liability. Also of note, for 2022, the actuaries did determine that the contribution rate would have to increase from 10% of pay to 10.25% of pay for both the employee and the employer, and those are always equal to each other, as you can see historically. So I think overall, good news for the CSRS plan. We've got a strong funding ratio. We've got some healthy tiers that are coming up, and so we're just working down that unfunded liability from the legacy plan.
Chair Wilkerson?
Yes.
May I ask a quick question while you're there, Phil?
Yes, I'm sorry. I can't see you.
No problem.
Go ahead, Council.
Hi, Phil. Great presentation. Really enjoyed my time on CSRS. Love that board. On the increase from 10 to 10.25, even though that is the agreement, is there anything keeping the city from, or the city council from making a one-time contribution to make up for the, because part of the reason we are needing an increase, my understanding is because we have such a hiring shortage at the city. And because we haven't hired approximately, getting close to 200 employees for so long, those contributions have not been going in as they normally would. And I would just hate for the increase to have to fall on the backs of the employees through, by no fault of their own, there hasn't been hiring. So is there anything stopping the council from trying to seek out funds to make up that instead of, basically taking it out of their paychecks next year?
There's no mechanism I'm aware of that would prevent making excess contributions. The challenge is that the actuary math combines, lots of different variables across 3,000 people. So the intent could be, so that the 25 basis point increase works out to $280,000 each for the employee and the employer. So if we're to make a $500,000 contribution to essentially fund all of that, we would close this year's gap, but there's no guarantee that it would close future year gaps. So we still may have to increase 25 basis points next year because it's just a one-time contribution this year. And actually, it's a perfect segue for kind of what happened between last year and this year, how we changed our funding level. We had a very good year in investments, made almost $34 million above the actuary's assumption. So decreased the liability by that, but through improved mortality, we had very few deaths last year, but more so through fewer workers in the active system, we had fewer contributions than expected. So it was about a $30 million shortfall, over the life of the plan because of those short contributions last year. So 1 year of, smaller than assumed contributions can have a pretty extended impact on the plan. But I think one thing that is important about that increase in contributions by staying on path is we avoid this accounting liability that when we went to the annual update, we were able to reduce, through some accounting rules, $104 million of liability because we were able to have a credible plan to fund it. So each year when we're making the $200,000 or $300,000 increase in contributions, we're able to avoid $100+ million liability on the balance sheet. So it's quite an investment to make those annual updates rather than taking a large impact on the balance sheet.
But just to round back to you, so if we did make a one-time contribution, it could have dramatic positive effects going forward, and possibly if we hired more people and got back up to staff, those contributions could also be added in, which might reduce the future increases that would be needed. On
an order of magnitude, hiring would have a greater impact because they would be assumed to be in the system for a long period of time versus a one-time contribution. Any contribution is going to help the plan in the long term, but the hiring back would have a bigger ongoing impact.
Thank you.
Won't delve into the benefit tiers too much, but we have updated benefit tiers to be competitive with other retirement plans and reduce that long-term liability I mentioned a little earlier. We'll move to the LEF Fire plan. So this plan's a little bit different. It, again, is closed, and so because it's a closed plan, anytime someone does die, the liability is going to decrease. So we see the liability falling consistently for the plan. There's about a $36 million investment for that plan. And between the asset base and the decreased liabilities, we've seen dramatic increase in the funding level for the plan, now at about 66% funded. This plan is funded statutorily through fire insurance premiums and a portion of property taxes. And so because it has that statutory funding mechanism, due to that increase in the contribution levels, additionally, it's projected in 2028, the plan will be 100% funded. And once that plan is 100% funded, those statutory contributions will no longer need to be made. We're currently contributing about $3.3 million a year, so that would be a $3.3 million benefit to the general fund by not having to make those contributions to the LEFT plan. The police plan has a similar benefit that it pays to police officers. However, it doesn't have that statutory funding mechanism. So we basically pay each year the cost of the plan. So there's no surplus for future years, other than we've recently made excess contributions knowing that a retro payment was going to be due as the out of contract. Once the bargaining unit agreed to its new contract, we're no longer out of contract, and had retro payments paid out. So it also goes to retirees that made retro payments. So for 2021, we did have about $1 million of excess payments above contributions, but we had been saving those on an annualized basis. So this plan, because it doesn't have a residual funding source, essentially is not funded. It's at about 3%, so that's equal to whatever's in the bank account. And that will continue to have year-over-year contributions as long as there are participants in the plan, or unless a decision was made to fund ahead, like there is with the fire plan.
Okay. Any questions for Philip before he continues? Go for it, Philip. Then. Oh, Councilmember Munn.
Yep.
Maybe I'll do it at the end because I think you're getting close to it and I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah, I've got one more slide and then just a brief summary of our legislative items. So the defined contribution plan continues to grow. Essentially, we have every quarter new records in account balances. We're at over $350 million in assets. These are not held in trust by the city. These are held by participants. They vest immediately, so as soon as these balances do hit, it's like a bank account, and they're able to have those funds. We did have a number of accomplishments in the 457 plan in the past year or so. Probably top of note is we did complete an IRS audit. I've always joked we're the most audited department in the city because each of the plans does receive an audit. Unfortunately, the IRS was able to find more audits for us to participate in, but we did complete that audit in July after about 15 months. We did have 2 instances of excess contributions related to something called special catch-up contributions. So if a participant had not made their total IRS limit contribution in prior years, we were able to add those back up and make excess contributions as they, in their final 3 years of working, did find that a couple of participants made contributions above those limits, and we will have to recoup those excess contributions, and then they'll have to pay taxes on those. Did complete the Local 29, so citywide there's one plan that all participants, all city employees are eligible to participate in. That's the ICMA plan. And then there's a smaller plan that only Local 29 bargaining members can participate in. So we did complete a plan redesign there. You'll notice we kept 3 years of history for that Local 29 plan. That's because prior to 3 years ago, the bargaining unit had been administering the plan. But however, the plan sponsor, the city, we do need to have administrative oversight. So we've joined with them to make sure we do have oversight of that plan and are meeting our fiduciary duty as the plan sponsor. So did complete a plan redesign as a part of that, and that'll be implemented at the beginning of 2022. We also completed 2 RFPs that'll offer significant savings to participants. It reduces record-keeping fees by 77% for ICMA participants and 61% for VOIA participants. So the more lower the fees, the more they're able to contribute to the plan, the better their retirement benefits will be. Additionally, as a part of the Police Guild contracts, we were able to amend the plan amendments and work with payroll to allow contributions of retro payments. So that now will apply to all city employees, regardless of bargaining unit. So anytime there's a retro payment related to a contract, they can make those retro payments contributions to their 457 plan on a tax-deferred basis. So as a result of our annual review, we did have 3 legislative items. Mentioned the contribution rate increase, so that's a 25 basis point increase for both employee and employer contributions. That costs each side about $280,000 per year and does remove that $100 million liability from the balance sheet. As a part of the IRS audit, the Local 29 plan did not have an administrative account before the year, so we did have $10,000 of legal costs related to that audit that we do have an SBO for today. And then finally, CSRS beneficiary designation. This is an area of the code that we found our definitions of spouse and domestic partnership were outdated. So we're revising those to include same-sex spouses and then reduce that emphasis on domestic partnerships. And also found that there was a gap between probate RCWs in determining whether these benefits should be based on what the participants have labeled their beneficiary as, or if it should be handled through probate. And so we clarified that a participant's beneficiary designation will take precedence in that gray area. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. And if there's anybody, Councilmember Mum perhaps, that does have questions, I'm available.
Great. Any questions from council to Philip? And just speak up because I can't see the whole screen.
Okay, I'll do it.
Okay.
Philip, happy to sponsor the SBO for the 457 audit costs and the CSRS beneficiary designation. If you don't have a council sponsor, I can co-sponsor as well. But I do have some concerns, and I want to do some more investigation of jacking it up yet again for to 10.25%. I understand the balance sheet issue, but what bothers me is the National Association of State Retirement Administrators that looks both at local and state governments says the average with Social Security is 6.25%. And I have seen this contribution go up and up and up every year, and I know why, because I got to participate on the retirement board, but I think at some point we have to recognize that this comes out of the paychecks of the people that we hire, and especially when we have a hiring shortage, they look at this, and they look at 10%, 10.25% of their pay coming out for pension, and if they work for state government or another government or PERS or even teachers, it's around 6 to 7%. And so we have to pay higher salaries potentially to compete. So this is just, I think, a good discussion for us at council and work with our CSRS board to say, maybe we should really take a look at this, because we've pretty much approved these increases year after year after year. But maybe there's a way we can maybe slow this down or find other ways. And maybe, Phil, you and I have talked about there might be another way to make up the gap, maybe some kind of future funding. We'd love to hear from you some other ideas of how to keep these percentages down, especially when we're in a hiring crunch. So maybe you might want to talk about a couple of those options, and we could come back and have you tell us about those.
Definitely, I can do some research, and I think part of the number that's missing in NASR is that 6% is the average employee contribution. So our employee contribution rate is higher than many other plans, but the total cost of the plan would be very much in line. So in most of those plans, the employer is paying a higher proportion of the benefit than the employee. In ours, we split that 50-50.
And what was the type of thing you were talking to me about this morning that maybe potentially we could look at that other communities are doing to make up the gap? We're doing great. I just want folks to know we're at one of the highest levels of funding that we've been, I think, only one other time in history for the city. So you've done a tremendous job. But there are some other options to get fully funded, right?
There's no kind of magic bullet. We're going to have to fund that unfunded liability. So we've looked at some other options like a pension obligation bond. Some communities have done that where they issue a bond specifically to cover that unfunded pension liability, and then over the life of the bond, through investing, they hope to close that funding gap. So we did look at that early in the pandemic. Couldn't quite make the math work, but it is worth exploring and probably sharing some of our research there. I think the other big thing is this is, working through the snake analogy is very much the case. So the Rule of 75, 80, and 90 plans are all very well funded, well over 100% funded. And so those excess fundings are able to help the unfunded portion that's, working through the snake. So at some point, this is going to become a very low-cost plan where, it's probably a 6% matching on each side, but we've got to get that unfunded liability through, and that's where kind of we're feeling the pain now, and we'll, unfortunately, in pension math terms, have to feel it for a while, a decade or more before we kind of see the other side of the hill.
Great. Thanks. So, Philip, with all that, do you still need to give us the benefit plans annual review, and could you cut it down a little bit? We're a little bit behind time.
No, this was kind of all in one. We just...
All in one? Okay.
Yes,
all right, thank you.
I'm done.
Well, I'm glad to work with Councilmember Mumm on this legislative action, and we will get back with you. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Next, we have Alex from the Office of Equity and Inclusion, and we are bringing a resolution about, because within our city comprehensive plan, we talk about inclusion and communities and families. And I found that there's a lot of words and narrative to it, but no action behind it. So when Alex came on, we started looking at how do we meet and lead in our own goals around Spokane being the city of choice. So Alex, if you'd like to go ahead and talk a little bit about this, I appreciate it.
I should be unmuted first. Hi, Council. Thank you for having me. I am actually introducing a resolution forming an ad hoc equity subcommittee of City Council's Finance and Administration Committee. And let me see if my PowerPoint will cooperate here. Not what I wanted to do here. So first, I wanted to, the overall summary is go through the purpose, kind of the planning process that we went through with community members to help us inform how an equity subcommittee could function and be inclusive of everyone. And then also, along with that, we came across many obstacles and some learnings and some advice, and then walk through some of the next steps. So the purpose for the equity subcommittee is to identify and dismantle racial and social economic inequities in city services, programs, and decision-making processes by collaborating with City Council to ensure that race, religion, creed, color, sex, and national origin, marital status, familial status, domestic violence victim status, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, honorably discharged veterans and military status and refugee status, the presence of any sensory, mental, or physical disability as defined by the American with Disabilities Act and or the Washington state law against discrimination does not predict one's success. And on here is some of the other purposes that we highlighted in the resolution on how we could work together. So the process was we went through a visioning process with a steering committee that was made up by leaders from community-based organizations that were represented by the Native American, Black, Latino, Hispanic, Asian American, LGBTQ community, and also people with disabilities, and all their intersectionalities that they came across. Early on, we had conversations about many of the obstacles, which I'll go over. We then moved forward into how do we create a vision on how we can work together, both collaboratively with City Council and community members. And so part of a solution is establishing this and doing it together as opposed to doing it for the community. And then our next steps would be to implement it. So the obstacles that we came across with was mistrust in government, and we need to see more action. And I think this is something that we heard over and over. from all these community members. Need to set meeting norms in regards to language that we use and how we refer to each other. Diversity and leadership from each community. One organization cannot represent the whole community's interests, so I think this is coming into play on how we form a group. The need to create a space to bring diverse groups together. They really appreciated that we created the space and we were having these conversations. But again, it's been a historical obstacle that we were having. And then ensure that intersectionality is not lost in any of the conversations. So some of the suggestions, and the majority are like, how do we create a group? But then there were some just additional suggestions of ideas. So learning from each other and not making assumptions, invest in community and center community and decision-making policies, use an equity lens while drafting programs and policy, which I think is something that we have talked about in different forms with some of the different groups that we have, like our Housing Action Group or the SAS group, but then also ideas that you council members have brought up to us. And council being the lead in developing the equitable practices with advice and consultation with communities that have been impacted by inequities. Other suggestions is dive into participatory budgeting and train the community on what that means, and signage of how we are branding our city, use it to make it the city more inclusive. So now, one of the next steps after adopting the resolution would be working with the steering committee and city council on recruitment. One of the questions that keeps coming up is how many residents should participate on a subcommittee, and then outreach, and then work with community-based organizations on outreach as their trusted messengers to nominate residents to be a part of that. And then if you have any questions and suggestions to the resolution, please let us know before we bring it forward. And
thank you, Alex. Go ahead. Any questions? Councilmember Stratton.
Alex, just a quick one. So how does this committee, how will this intersect with Jarrell, who was just hired for the Office of Civil Rights? How are those two going to, I'm assuming that Alex or that Jarrell will be part of this committee, or there will be a connection with that over in the mayor's office?
Yeah, I think the way that we set it up is that interested administrations or other groups or people that are interested in collaborating and looking at practices to coordinate with me as we do that. One thing that we have left that I'm drafting is a guiding principle of how do we bring our ideas and issues to this group so we could be able to apply either an equity lens or get that feedback quicker when it comes to like equity policy.
Perfect, thanks.
Yep. Councilmember Kinnear.
Thanks. I'm so appreciative of this, Alex. I'm glad you're working on getting this started. My question is, we've heard from HR that they're wanting to do an equity and inclusion office, and that to me seems redundant because of your expertise and skill. Is there a way that you could partner with them and include them in how you move forward with this discussion, this subcommittee?
Yeah, I think that we could. I think equity should be owned by everybody that's doing some of this work to ensure that the outcomes are equitable. So we do need a lot of, I can see in the administration that you probably need some training around it, some, building some of the language. And then when we're talking about policy, each department probably can look at their policies and practices through either an equity lens, look at their programs or budgets through an equity lens, and be able to apply for implement that. So I think, yes, we can. I look forward to inviting. I like collaborating, and I think the community is looking for collaboration. So how we do this, I think we need a lot of support in doing some of the equity work.
Councilmember Cathcart.
Yeah, thank you. So, Alex, I guess I'm wondering, is the main focus of the subcommittee going to be on kind of budget and fiscal issues then? Is that why it's connected to the Finance Committee? Because that's going to be the primary emphasis. And then I guess just kind of wondering in terms of how you envision the group, like what the process of the group is going to be. Are they going to author ordinances for council consideration? Are they going to review ordinances or something like that that council is approving for their feedback? And what is that process kind of, just broadly speaking, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think to your first question, looking at all the other subcommittees, and then, one, I think Betsy is a strong supporter of some of the equity work that we're doing. But then also, when we're looking at some of the other committees, equity kind of goes into all the different aspects of the work that we do. And it doesn't just neatly fall under one, where the administration and budget piece also does influence all of the other committees. So I think that's a reason why we're housing it here. The other piece is, how do we have more voices that haven't always been at decision-making tables or have built relationships with leaders? How can we also build those relationships? And I think that's another aspect of this. It's introducing new people that don't feel represented a lot of the times to our decision makers. And then also, what are the best practices that we should be having in our office? Or what are the questions that we should be asking? And what are the things that we might be missing when we're thinking of a new project or policy? We could see how we could partner with them to help us through an equity lens, or partner with them to get people with lived experience to tell you what are the obstacles that they see in a policy that we're pushing forward.
Okay.
Thank you, Alex. I'll just end with the voices at the table. We just saw a gap, that there wasn't a space for our communities of color, and money affects almost everything. And we looked at a way to operationalize it so it doesn't get lost, that it is embedded in our government and the way that we do things. So whether we're here or not, there will be this committee. I hope it works with the administration side of the house and partner, but at this point in time, there has been nothing in this arena that the administration has done in outreach or collaboration with these communities, and they want it and need it to be heard as we continue to grow our city. So I look forward to it. I'm sure Alex will be glad to hand it off if something was stood up by the administration as we go forward, but at this point in time, there is nothing, and we can't continue to wait as our citizens want to participate in our government. Any other questions for Alex? Thank you, Alex. We look forward to more. So at this time, Dr. Jones, thank you for your patience today. We've just been all over the place, lots of questions. So
been a good learning experience.
Yes. Dr. Jones, we look forward to our quarterly economic brief.
All right, glad to be here. And with me on the call is my associate, Dr. Kelly Cullen, from the Institute, and she'll be explaining some of the slides that we have. So as before, we've got about 3 or 4 different categories, and we just want to walk you through them ever so briefly. And I will say that if you want to take away, that this is a very Well, let me say, this is a strong report you're about to hear about the economy in the city of Spokane, and for that matter, the county of Spokane. So let's get into this. As before, we're going to try to provide trends that are specific to the city. We've succeeded in most cases, and we're still hopeful that we'll be able to do this for all the trends over the next few months. Our folks that we rely on in employment security have been just a little bit busy with COVID-19 issues. So you can see where we're going to cover: population, employment, a lot of construction, and then we end up with revenue and taxable retail sales. So before we start, though, I just had to bring this to your attention. I don't know if you feel this way, but you should, or you might, that we are bigger than we thought. We are more numerous as a county and more numerous as a city than what we've been led to believe by the estimates coming out of Olympia. And that's due to the decennial census that we just got the results on in late summer. And you can see I start this by looking at the county estimates that were out in 2020, and OFM put those in 2020 at 522,000 plus. And
Dr.
yet,
Dillon,
yeah,
this is brilliant. If you think you're sharing your screen, I'm not seeing a screen.
You're not seeing it. Oh, okay.
Anyone else is.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Let me see. Can you see it now?
Nope.
Okay, let me move on here. Can you see it now?
Nope.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
All right.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
I can hear you. Okay, let me. Can you see that particular slide, Council President?
Yeah, the county and city population.
Yeah, there you go. So, in one fell swoop, the county population went up 17,000 people. And I've checked around the state, at least Eastern Washington, and I found there's been no such discrepancy between OFM and the census except Spokane. So this is a rather remarkable change. And what does that mean for the city? Well, the city went up about 5,500 from 223,000 plus to almost 229,000. So this will have implications for those programs, federal programs that rely on population, and to the positive. And I'll just put out then, we don't have a 2021 count from the census, but we do have a 2021 estimate from OFM that was 225,000. But I'm going to put that when they start making adjustments next year, OFM does, that it's really about 230,000 a day. So you are governing a little bit larger group of people than you did just a few short months ago. Okay, trying to give real-time insight into population growth here in 2021 and the latter part of 2021. And you might recall that we ended up on driver's license surrenders, which tracks those people who are moving in from out of state. And I'll just point out that this particular graph shows the second quarter of this year, we had a fairly high number compared to the number we had in second quarter of 2020, which was 0, essentially. But more importantly, it's a higher number than what we saw 2 years ago in 2019. So we are seeing a definite return to moving into this particular part of the world. This is county only, by the way. This is not the city. It doesn't, however, capture those people who moved in from in-state, nor does it capture those people in Spokane who move out of state. And we won't know that for a bit of time before we get the census data, which lags about 3 years. But for your listening pleasure, I thought you might want to know that in terms of the states that contribute the most to the influx to the county of Spokane, it is California. They are California, Idaho, Oregon, and significantly some southern states, Arizona and Texas. So to just end this particular look at in-migration from out of state, what we're seeing is that we're larger than 2019, but we're still not as high as we were in 2017 or 2018 with people moving in. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cullen right now, and she's going to walk you through some sort of standard but yet very important labor force measures about the economy. And again, these are denominated at the city of Spokane. So Kelly?
Hi, thank you, Patrick. That's a different screen. Okay, sure. I was looking at mine a little bit different. Sorry about that. This is labor force, and so the civilian labor force, this is everybody who is employed or is actively looking. And as you can see, the red line shows the change, the year-to-year change from the same quarter of the previous year. And so because of the pandemic, you can see that sharp drop in the red line. But the good news is that the most recent quarter, the second quarter of 2021, for which we had data, the labor force is back up again, close to 110,000. So it is doing pretty well. If we look this quarter compared to 1 year ago, which was just before we really saw the stay-at-home orders and the directives take effect, we are only down 2.5% from where we were in 2020 second quarter. And the upward trend, as you can see at the end of the purple bar there, it's boding really well for growth to continue. So really strong rebound of our civilian labor force. So let's move on and look at employment. So this is total employment is the purple, the lilac bars there, and then the red line shows, again, the year-to-year change from the same quarter previous year. And again, you can see that big drop, sudden drop due to the pandemic, but the nice rebound. You can see that nice trending upward red line there that our most recent numbers, second quarter of 2021, our total employment is back up again. Number of jobs. This is number of jobs. We haven't reached our previous peak yet. Our previous peak was back in quarter one of 2019 when we were really healthy, but we're getting really close to being where we were before. Again, so strong trending upward of those purple bars. So our economy has survived, weathered the pandemic, and is back to start growing, being above those previous peaks, we hope, for the end of the year, this year. In terms of unemployment, so these are the unemployment numbers. The really good news, the unemployment number is actually lower right now than it was pre-pandemic. So we're down for the city. We're down at 4.6%. As you can see that we had that huge peak, obviously, where the red and the purple bars ticked upward. So we had huge unemployment that we had to deal with, and it has, look at the health of the economy. We have rebounded, come down slightly through the sevens, and we're now down at 4.6 as of August of this year. So again, looking really strong right now, and again, lower than it was 2 years ago, even in August of 2019, before we had the effects of the pandemic. So basically, those are the highlights. But in terms of employment, unemployment, and civilian labor force, everything is moving in what we think is the right direction.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. I think we can expect going forward, as Kelly writes here, even lower unemployment rates in the city and probably the county too. So, okay, so if you recall, what we have offered to show you every quarter is looking at the economy of in this case, the county, and we hope we can provide these looks in the context of city when the labor economists can come up for some air and give us those city level numbers, which is actually a special cut of the data. But we're going to go over the top five, and as you'll see that these top five really are, in many cases, if not most cases, are city-centric. These are not suburban type of activities, and you can. We're also going to keep the scale on the left-hand side of these graphs the same, and you can see the top part of the legend is tops out at 45,000, and we're going to keep that because we want you to see just the relative sizes of these bars as we course through these graphs. But essentially, I would call this a no change scenario in the most recent quarter that we have data for. In this case, it's quarter one, not quarter two. Quarter two ended, of course, end of June, and we should get those numbers out sometime in December from the state. But this is by far and away the largest sector in the county and in the city, and you can see it's very close to 45,000, and we're just a little bit off the peak in the most recent quarter we saw at the start, which was held at the start of the pandemic. Why is this important? Number one, it's a huge sector in our economy, and number two, it pays above average wages. Now, this is a bit of a other side of the coin look at sectors. Retailing has always been very important for Spokane, city and county overall, and yet we see that this has been a sector that has suffered. And as I've noted in the last time we did this, that decline in employment, however, started before the pandemic, and the pandemic just accelerated that. So in the pandemic, we had a very deep dip, and we're still in negative territory when we do year-over-year comparisons. The average annual wage here is below the county's wage, and it might go up depending on how Amazon is counted in the numbers. So we'll see how that plays out going forward. Now, the third largest sector is the hardest hit. And again, this is the other side to the coin that we see in a couple of sectors I'm about to show you. And this is accommodations and food and beverage. And it is still recovering. And you can see that we took a very large dip in the lockdown quarter of last year, and we have yet to come close to even approaching what we had pre-pandemic. So right now we're less than 15,000 jobs in accommodation and food services, and that's a far cry, as you can see here, 26% below what we saw at the start of the pandemic. So in terms of jobs, it's a little more than 5,000 jobs. And this is a sector where I think a lot of people in our trade look at not coming back too quickly. These next two are kind of the stars. Professional and technical services, a bit of a change to the positive over Q1, which was the peak. These are, if you will, the white-collar jobs that typically are very urban, downtown sort of jobs. And right now, the latest count we have is about 11,000. The average annual wage is 69,000, which is much higher than the overall average. And then finally, the sector that actually performed the best during 2020's pandemic quarters, which is finance and insurance. And the current count is a bit lower than it was last time I showed you this, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think we're still looking quite good, and you can see why this matters in terms of the local economy. The average in this particular sector is over $90,000 bucks. So just to summarize our labor market from a sector point of view, we're looking at some sectors that are about where they were before the pandemic, with the exception of the hospitality sector, which probably won't get to where it was before 2023. We have seen some good wage growth for various reasons, retailing and finance and insurance. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly now to go over, this is city level data you're about to hear on your construction and building permits.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. So this data is from the building permits reports that I get from the city, and I have it broke down by single family and multifamily for the residential building permits, and then I also have data on the non-residential building permits. And so looking at the single family residential building permits, look at those nice purple bars over on the right there. showing the rebound. So obviously, things fell in the middle of the graph when we had the pandemic, in the midst of the pandemic, the slowdown from the economy. And you can see that the last 3 quarters, including this very robust last second quarter of 2021 that we just went through, really strong, permitting going up, and up even more. So it's making up for that slump when construction was off in 2020. So some of that growth that would have occurred, permitting construction that would have occurred, is now occurring now, along with new construction. And so we're up relative to where we were 2 years ago, pre-pandemic. This quarter compared to 2 years ago shows a lot more. But keep in mind, some of that was suppressed, because we didn't have the construction during the COVID year. But definitely trending in the right way. Multifamily, and again, this is number of units in this case. This is not number of permits. So if you have a big unit, for example, I think there was one permit and it covered 126 unit apartment building. So I think by looking at units, it gives us a little bit more sense of the expansion to housing, multifamily in this case. And look at those 3 red bars trending upward again for the 3rd quarter in a row. Second quarter 2021 looking really good again. Part of that, being we were suppressed in 2020. But even before the building permits were lower in 2019. So obviously we're doing well in this case with the multifamily building and the number of units. Go on to the value of those. And so one thing that we can see is a number of permits, but we don't know how big or how valuable the units that they're building are. So for our single-family residences, this last quarter, they're starting to settle in the, 300 to 325, 326 was what it was second quarter. And so you can see that's pretty consistent, the $326,000 range that we had for the average value of our permit for a single-family residence. And that's pretty consistent with, what it was in the last couple quarters as well. We had a slight peak. One that was really high up there was that 3rd quarter of 2020. But you can see it stabilizing in that, 325, 350,000 range, consistent with our really hot real estate market going on right now. So things are looking good there. For our multifamily units, this is much more variable. It depends on the project, and what the different projects look like. So, even though it's down slightly, the average value of those permitted multifamily units, I wouldn't put a lot of stock into that. It's just sometimes the projects are lower. Nothing I think to be concerned about in this case. It has fallen slightly, but not anything I think to be alarmed about in terms of that. The total value, or the total number, now moving to non-residential, so this does not include any of the housing. So in this case, this is commercial, industrial, can include public works, schools, cell phone towers, hospitals, things like that. You can see, obviously, it's a cyclical pattern in some cases, where you'll have peaks followed by dips and so on, and that's normal. So in this case, looking at that last peak, quarter 2 of 2021 is up, which is really nice, and it's almost at the level that it was 2 years ago, second quarter of 2019. So basically, we've almost fully recovered to the levels of non-residential permitting that we had back then. We probably want a little bit more, but still, I think for what the economy has been through, I think that's showing a good amount of non-residential permits that the economy has regained its footing, is what I'm seeing in that graph. In terms of the value, again, more variable than, let's say, the single-family home ones in this case, because the projects are so different, all the ones that get permitted. But you can see we had those projects, those schools that all were starting to be built in the same amount of time. So there's that little outlier you can see still in that graph. But you can see that the permitting was, $102 million. It dipped slightly, but it's still, the value is up from the same quarter 3 years ago. So I think that still shows growth in terms of our economy. So basically, both the single and the multifamily building permits have trended upward. We did see a slight dip in the value of the multifamily, but that could just be the type of projects that were permitted. And then, although the quantity of non-residential permits was strong, similar to what we saw in 2018 even, the average valuation was down slightly. And again, some of that is that variability of the projects, but I do see that we have seen a return to normal post-pandemic amount of permitting going on in the city.
Okay, thank you, Kelly, and we'll take it home now with looking at revenue in one instance. This is taxable retail sales, and you may have heard this from Tonya already. She may have more recent data than we get from the Department of Revenue. We have first quarter of this year, and you can see the growth rate was 15%. Which is a far cry from what it was just a few short quarters ago. And it is now higher than it was in Q1 versus, of course, not of course, but versus the first quarter of 2020 and the first quarter of 2019. So if you draw a line through that for those 3 quarters, it's obviously going up. My guess is, as I put down here, that it's going to be a higher gain in quarters 2 than 15% if the state is any guide to our actions in this city, and indeed it is. I've done just a little bit of correlation analysis looking at the variation between the city of Spokane and the state in terms of revenues, and it is the resulting number, the correlation coefficient, is pretty close to 1, which means it's a pretty good match. So here's what the state's been looking like. I just want to draw your attention to these numbers that I put the percentage gain, and these are year over year, of course, from the second quarter. So the state went up 50%, 40%, and 13% in the second quarter of this year. And for the second quarter, we have 2 months, and you can see those are also in the 20 to 15% range. So I don't know. I haven't really talked to Tonya about her projections, but these are not projections, but results for this year. But these are obviously sort of off the chart kind of results. So I'm just going to end by looking ahead at the Washington economy and see what insights it might give to our economy. And this is from the latest work by the Forecast Council. This was September, so just about 3 weeks ago. And this is looking at personal income. And personal income and taxable retail sales are highly, highly correlated. And what the ERFC is suggesting is there's going to be a significant drop of the percentage terms in calendar year 2022 with the income, and I'm quite sure that they're basing that forecast on basically the not the choking off, but the winnowing down of the federal funds that have come to so much of our state, and then they forecast a rebound of 5% in 2023. So what does that mean for revenues? Unfortunately, they don't offer revenue forecasts on a calendar year basis. These are only a fiscal year basis, so middle of the year to middle of the year. And you can see that for the year that ends next June, they're forecasting a 5% increase over this period. So that would include the months we're in right now, the second half of 2021 through early 2022. And then for 2023, they're forecasting a relatively low increase, which is looking at then the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023. It does rebound, though, in fiscal year 2024. Okay, so I'll just say that I'm going to stick my neck out and say that we're going to end real strong here in the city. Fourth quarter may not be as strong as we thought it was, given a few things which we won't have time to go into. But I think we're going to end up for the year in strong double digits. I put that in the teens. The Forecast Council is looking at growth for next year, calendar year, but at a much slower rate. I will say, though, as I just want to finish here, this council has, over the last 2 or 3 years or longer, forecasted on the low side of things. So we'll see whether they will revise their forecast upward as we get into the legislative season coming up. And that, in a nutshell, is it. I know that we're running short on time, but I just wanted to thank you for your patience and don't know if there's time for any questions.
Any questions for Dr. Jones? Speak up if you have something.
Hi, Patrick. It's Candace. Good to see you.
Hello, Candace.
I just thought it would be interesting to comment on a major employer who has had a big impact on, at least for sure, the north side, because we've had so many hirings with great salary and benefits, and we're seeing a real unemployment, dip. But I'm just wondering if some of those higher salaries or higher hourly wages is maybe why we're seeing some of those increases in spending and that sort of thing. That might be a long-term situation for us. How is Amazon impacting this is really my question.
That's a good question. Of course, Amazon hasn't been there that long to have a baseline of increases. But from what I've understood is that they've raised what they told the community they were going to offer to something substantially higher, in part due to the labor market. So given the number of people that they hire, that's definitely a positive trend. No doubt about that.
Any other questions or comments? Well, again, Dr. Jones, thank you. I think you affirmed some of the anecdotal things we had been hearing around the community.
Sure.
That it's not as bad as we thought it was going to be. So always excited, though, to get the real deal from you. So we look forward to your next quarterly update. Thanks.
Right. Let me see if I can get this screen back to you. Or can Hannah Lee take that over? I'm having trouble giving up our screen. There we go. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to unshare. Can I unshare?
You're done sharing.
I'm done sharing. Very good. Okay, thank you.
All right, take care. Bye. Thank you. Jake, quarterly investment briefs.
Yes, I am here and sharing my screen. And here we go. So I've scrapped the usual PowerPoint that I have with this, but it can be found on page 74 of the packet. And you can go ahead and skip the first page because most of the good stuff is on the second one. We're looking at the cash and investment total for the quarter. We ended at $434 million. That is about a $13 million decrease from the previous quarter. Specifically, I wouldn't be able to comment on that, but most of that is, operating and capital expenditures in excess of the inflows that were coming in. I do have some investment transactions to comment on here that affect kind of in between those lines there. Is maturities. We had about $25 million that came in August. Those were purchased probably back in 2016. You can see the rates that were attached to those around that time period were about 1.3 in yield. So as those are coming off and maturing, our yield is going to decline with that. I made a couple purchases, about $10 million. I made those in July, and around that time, it's fairly low yields there, about 0.185% and 0.23 for a 2.5 year. However, it does look like rates are increasing across the curve. So as we have excess cash, we're going to kind of fill in the gaps down the ladder and hopefully pick up some increasing rates. And on top of that, the LGIP is looking like it's very small, but it is increasing. So the overall yield for the quarter ended the yield to maturity was 1.07. Slightly down from the previous quarter at 1.10. The unrealized gain related to the inverse relationship between our interest rates and the market values was $6.5 million. That is down about $1.1 million from the previous quarter. Essentially, as rates, yields are picking up across the curve, the demand for our type of investments is just slightly down from what it was. So one more thing on this report. I won't go into any of these. It's just a breakdown in a different way of the portfolio. Looking at that 1.07% yield to maturity again, and our average maturity for the portfolio is just slightly over 2 years. One way that we compare that to is the 2 to 3 year Treasury yield. As of September 30th, that was 0.28 to 0.53. So still, from a yield standpoint, we're still that's looking good against that. However, we do have some long-term investments which do have the the price volatility that go with that. However, we also have the liquidity that is sustaining us at the moment. And I also did some comparisons to some other cities in the region in the Western United States, and I'm seeing yields anywhere from about 0.6 to 0.9. So again, from a yield standpoint, it's looking pretty good against those. Any questions on investments?
Anything for Jacob? Not, keep going.
All right, then just a couple pages down from that is the SIP loan capacity report, taking the investment balance from above, which is the $422.9 million. We're taking out bond proceeds associated with the library and the park bonds, as those are more temporary in nature and being spent down faster. It leaves us with $392.5 million. So per our policy, 15% of investment portfolio balance, 15% is $58.8 million. We are currently using 42.1 of that, leaving about 4.27 SIP loan capacity. And something very exciting for me and the rest of Treasury is that we have implemented a new debt module using the same company that does our investments. And so these reports here are canned reports that took about 10 seconds to run rather than a whole afternoon. So this kind of shows the breakdown of the loans. The beginning balance is the 42.165. That would have been on the previous report. We had no bond issues. And we paid a couple debt service payments on a couple CLIDs. So that leaves us with the 42.1. And then this last report is the statement of 30 years, shows that debt service going out for the next 30 years. And we made one major debt service so far. So for the rest of the year, in principle, you should see a reduction of that SIP loan portfolio of about $4.5 million, and then roughly $7 million for the next 3 years. And then after that, our balloon payment, which could be a refinance at that time. So any questions on SIP loans?
Anyone from council out there? Hearing none? Thank you very much, Jake. Appreciate it.
Thank you, council.
Mr. Paul, are you ready to take us home?
I am, Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity. And good afternoon, City Council. I'm going to attempt to share, and I have a coworker here to tell me that I did it right or did it wrong. Let's see. Okay. So I'll start off with the monthly reports that Amy Blaine from our office puts together in a part of the packet, the general fund update. So again, this shows the changes, increasing or decreasing the general fund. Through September 2021, the general fund budget has increased by $18.8 million. Approximately $4 million is due to the encumbrance carryover, where open contracts, capital projects, or bills yet to be paid are carried over from the prior fiscal year into the current. About $11 million is also due to the Guild contract, which means about $3.8 million has been added via SBOs during the current year. So if we look on page 2 of that PDF report, at the very bottom, there were 2 SBOs that were passed by council in August but posted in September. So it's the $188,000 for the emergency shelter contract with Truth Ministries and $150,000 for the Cooling Warming Hazardous Air Center SBO. Any questions on this first report? Okay. So the second report, this is the intra-fund budget transfers where it changes expenditure lines from one type category to another. I just wanted to point out 2 of the larger ones that you see on here were actually net zero changes. They were both under fire. There's the $542,000, about 2/3 of the way down. This was just changing program and function codes, so there's no reclassifications. Since it was involving salaries and benefits, it appears on this report. And then the last one at the bottom there, that's the SCBA equipment for Spokane Fire. Again, just changing expenditure types, no change to the use or the need for that expenditure. Any questions on this report? Okay. Moving on to our one-page summary of general fund changes, both revenue and expenditures. And again, the highlighted lines are changes from the prior month report. Most of this for the September report are really just house cleaning items to make sure they match with the reports that Amy had put together. So the encumbrance rollover amount was slightly off from the version that we were showing in the past. We reran it in the system. Now it matches what Amy's been reporting all these months at 4.1 million. So we made those updates. There was a slight difference for the QR1 SBOs. I think it was the $10,000 council SBO. We just missed it in our calculations, so that's included. And then it's also updated for those QR3 changes that we just mentioned, those 2 SBOs, Truth Ministries and the cooling centers. So that brings the bottom line impact to unappropriated fund balance will be about $4.1 million at the end of the current year, and we'll talk a little bit about current year revenue and expenses in a second. Any questions on the monthly report? Okay. Switching over to our short PowerPoint. Okay. So again, financials for September presented in October. The headlines we're about 4% above budget. And again, budget is what we project in the budget office on the revenue side, and about 4% below on expenditures year to date through September. So it's about $128 million in revenue collected against $123 million projected. Sales and local retail sales tax, which is our 1%, continues to perform better than projections. It's about 21% above where we anticipated it to be, and about 27% above prior year to date. The big 3, sales, property, utility, are about 7% above budget through September. On the expenditure side, again, $155 million in expenses against $161 million budget. Salaries and benefits, again, the largest group, about $9 million below where we anticipated. And the majority of that's going to be that guild agreement where the SBO added the authority to it, but it was already paid out in the accounting world as a prior period adjustment. The last bullet there for uniform overtime, again, through September 2021, police have spent about 3% less than compared to September 2020, and fire has spent about 75% more through that same time period. Looking at the revenues just on a graph here, again, about 4% above budget, which equates to about $5 million. You can see the light blue line are the actuals, and gray is where we expected it to be. So slightly better a couple months throughout the year, and it was, again, just a little bit above where we anticipated for September. It's about 8% above fiscal year 2020 year to date. This table shows all the major categories in general fund revenue. The gold box up at the top, that's 90%, 89% of the overall revenue within those 5 categories. And you can see the year-to-date variance column is the one that I think is probably the most important on this one. How well the sales tax and local retail sales tax is doing compared to where we thought it would be. It's almost $5 million to the good, but then you start to see negatives across the board in some of these other categories, which is going to pull down the benefits that we're seeing on that local retail sales tax and the taxable sales activity. So as Dr. Jones mentioned earlier, so this
Paul?
Paul?
I'm sorry, Chair
Go ahead,
Wilkerson.
Councilor Mum.
I just want to be clear. What you said was that the expenses pull that down. but it is a net positive, correct?
Well, this doesn't show expenses. Sorry, I meant we're doing better in sales tax and property tax and interfund taxes from where we expected it to be year to date, but we're doing worse in all these other revenue categories.
But it doesn't wipe it out.
It doesn't wipe it out, but it's going to erode some of that.
Of course. So what's the net positive?
So net positive at the bottom, that's where you see that $4.8 million, 4%
you.
to the good.
All right, that's what we need to cheer about.
Yeah.
So the public knows 4.788 to the good. Thank you.
Yep. So on the taxable sales side, for July 2021, up 19% compared to July 2020, and this is when the activity took place. At the next slide, we'll look at when the revenue was actually received. So July 2020 versus 21, retail trade up 13%, construction up 12%, accommodation and food services up 63%, because compared to July 2020, they had nowhere to go besides up. Total taxable sales for July were about $595 million, which is $94 million over July 2020. And year-to-date overall taxable sales are up 24% compared to the same time period in 2020. And then this chart shows when we actually receive the revenue year to year, year over year. So again, bottom right-hand side is the most recent September when we actually received the revenue for that July activity was up 19% compared to September of 2020. You can see pretty strong growth, which we'll see on the next page in a graph as well for the city and for this area. So when we graph those percent changes, our city, light blue, Seattle, Tacoma Valley, and County on there as well. You can also see the rebound that we had through the spring and early summer. And then when we take off the impact of the west side of the state, you can see a little more clearly that right at the tail end too, we're trending up a little bit from where we were September of last year. But again, we started lower than the Valley and the County. So again, really nowhere to go but up on those ones. And the last one is on the expense side, just showing the expenditures that we had throughout the year for the general fund. So it's about $6 million below budget, 3.8%. So far, 4% to the good on the revenue and 4% to the good on expenses. But again, that expense side, it's a little different since when you take into the effect of those SBOs, it's not starting from a balanced number. It's about 207 on the revenue. 207 million on the revenue, and that 227 I showed on the expenditure side too. So we'll have to do some adjustments on that, but it shows the expense graphed out for you there. Any questions?
Any questions? Usually, Paul, we don't have any. You're pretty detailed, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, with that, unless there's anything else, I'd like to take a moment of personal privilege. I would like to give some love to Hannah Lee Allers, Spokane City Council Director. Congratulations, she'll be getting married this weekend, so we just want to applaud her. And on behalf of City Council staff and City Council members, we have contributed to a little gift for you, Hannah Lee. And we are very excited for you, and we are wishing you just the best in the years to come with your new partner and last name. Also, I want to give a shout out to Michelle Murray out there. I saw something happen positive in her life, and we want to celebrate that also. So thank you all, and again, best wishes. And we will see you all again on November 15th, same time, same Zoom station. Have a great week. Bye-bye.